So what I'm looking at right here, this is just a quarter of the way down on my page. This is the section that J.S. Bibbins photographic artist, so his style. So this is verified to be his. So that's the front, that's the back right here. J.S. Bibbins, photographer, Newark, Illinois. Here's this picture, J.S. Bibbins, Newark, Illinois. And just look how good the quality style. And then this is the back of my picture, J.S. Bibbins, photographic artist, Newark, Illinois. So he doesn't put photographer. It's a little bit more plain. Whereas this is, I'm sure he spent some extra money to have a really stylized stamp for the word photographer. So I'd say the stamp for J.S. Bibbins, comma, that looks the same. Newark, Illinois. It looks a little more stylized right here. So maybe this was earlier 1860s. I don't know, but so the date on these 1863, and hers does have that gold. Her gold trim looks very similar to that. So hers is 1863. But the date difference is that there is no sun stamp, right? So and that ended in August 1866. And so that's why Gawain Weaver was talking to me. And I just ate it up, and I was just sitting there taking notes with myself and asking all these questions. And COVID had hit San Francisco just barely. So he was freaked out, and I was freaked out, but he still opened the studio, and it was such a miracle. The next day, San Francisco shut down completely, like everything. They were in lockdown. And then I drove back to Southern California. It took a little bit longer for them to go into lockdown. Oh, you want to see the date? Like March 14th, 2020. Seriously, they were in lockdown like the next day. But yeah, so J.S. Bibbins did have that background, totally different than this. The quality, very, very different. And so how I learned in a studio was to have really good lighting. But I kept thinking to look something like this up. And so this is really, really good. So you can see, so Gawain Weaver was talking about this, and I don't think I ever looked this up before, but I finally did that today. So he was trying to ask me like what was Lucian Foster's studio like? And I tried looking for it and reading the newspaper article, and I tried to find all this stuff, and I emailed it to him, and he just didn't, we didn't have a back and forth. And of course, I thought our paper would be so long and like detailed, and I was like hoping that Gawain Weaver would be a part of it, and he would get to say some stuff because the things that he said were so smart and amazing. Because he's an expert on old photography. So you can just look him on and make sure I spell it right. So look at Gawain Weaver Art Conservation. I don't think he's LDS. I think he would have mentioned it if he was when I met with him. I don't think he is, but um, he said he'd worked with someone that had found some collector pieces. But yeah, here's his website. So you guys should check him out. But I think last I checked, I think he did study chemistry and care and identification of photographs online. That was back in March 30th to May 2020. And he posted that in January of 2020. So you can see he knows his stuff. So he started talking to me a lot about wondering but what we do know is that Lucian Foster was poor and lived in the mansion with Joseph and Emma and the family. So then he wouldn't have had this. He just would have had a window and a gas lamp. like I can see right here in this picture of Phoebe. So this is the youngest daguerreotype I can find of Phoebe and of Wilford. There's a one that looks almost exactly the same. I still think it was, I think what's his name, Ron Fox, did email me and said that he put it, the daguerreotype case that it's in was not the original daguerreotype case, is what he said in an email. I sent him our paper and the website. That's all he had to say to me. You're wrong. I'm like, okay. Make sure I mention it in every video anytime I bring it up. So he just put it in, it wasn't the original case that it came in. I think it came maybe separate and on its own, which then I'm like, well, maybe it was a tin, even if it's not completely oxidized. So that's an interesting miracle right there, that it's floating around without glass and cover and hasn't turned black. But anyway, Phoebe, this is really bad lighting. Really. Like I'll look at this and we'll go back and look at J.S. Bibbins' photography. And again, it's 1844. Photography's only existed for 5 years. Not everyone. Oh, it says 1841 Skylight Studio. Is that 1841? So since it says, I want to look at this. Atelier 1841. This is in, is this French? Paris. Yeah, this is in French. So I don't know what they're saying right there. But yeah, I need to save this image. Studio, apparently 1841. But, Nauvoo, most everyone was still kind of, a lot of people were just whipping up some log cabins just to have a place to live. And then they would eventually make like a frame home if they could afford it. A lot of people couldn't. But Joseph and Emma's big mansion that had 20 rooms, which really was to help accommodate a lot of these people that were just showed up and got on a ship from England and just needed to stay there while they throw up a log cabin, for them. But when you see what you can see right here is this is a skylight. And they're saying that, like, Skylight Studio. So Godwin Weaver is like, oh, well, let's just see what his skylight was like so that we can understand the lighting. But I think it was a window and a gas lamp, and so really harsh side lighting. Maybe there was another gas lamp over here because it's not completely black, like he was probably trying. And kind of like us today, if you're doing photography, sometimes you set things up and you think, oh, it looks good. Okay, this looks great. There is even lighting, and then you take a shot and it just looks, there's a lot more contrast than what you see visually. Right. And then you can adjust things on your camera usually, but back then they couldn't. There's no electricity, there's no settings on their camera. They just take that thing off and they put that cap back on. So again, this is very harsh side lighting. Phoebe and Wilford did get their daguerreotypes taken by Lucian Foster in 1844 in August. The church has dated these. It's a consistent style of the 1840s. But they can't say 100% it was Lucian Foster, right? But that there isn't anything younger of them that are daguerreotypes. And anyway, but this is very descriptive that we think this is canons. So this is undisputed. This is like 100%. Although I wonder about this. I think the other one that Ron Fox found is cut in oval shape. I wonder if that was the one that was in a pin because it was trimmed and it looks closer, because these are supposed to be only a year apart, and I don't think he went from that to that in 1 year. Like, I think this is maybe made in, Salt Lake City. Maybe he had some plural wives at that point and started getting more pictures taken to give to them. So, don't know. So again, you look at this. To achieve this, this is so good. And this is the same person that handled this piece of paper and printed this off. But look at the lighting difference. Dramatic side lighting, short background, even lighting, very tall, flat, professional background. Okay, and you look, this is a very, it only existed like 2 years, but they've already got reflectors, they've got the ceiling. And these are artists that adopted it, so they might have already had that in order to paint someone. They just, I don't know. Look how good these are. It turned out so good right there. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. Yeah, I flipped through this really fast a minute ago, but look at that. It's 1800s, but that's a photography studio. That's the skylight. I just didn't see that until today. I don't know how old this is. These pictures look old. Is that just a skylight? I'm not sure what I'm seeing here. It's kind of hard to see because that looks a little bit modern, but I'm not sure. This is definitely the same thing. And there you go. There's a very flat background. There's a very tall one, just very, very professional. And this does look 1800s. I'm not sure if did they give a date? Dreaming of a Skylight Studio, 1878. But it seems a little bit later in the 1800s that they are obviously getting more advanced in what they could do. Here's this huge mess of paper. You can see that they might have had a photo inside of that at one point, and a bunch of frames, even more professional. Again, see there's that flat background like this. So this is kadenca.tumblr.com. So we're in Tumblr. This is possibly a studio. So obviously, some people might have had a bigger space, less space, more space than others. There's a good old camera and a skylight. They just got that sharp. And then all of this so that they can change. They were already learning. And I think Bibbins, I think he was really good. Because I learned, yeah, with kids, you can do he has a little bit of side lighting on this kid's face. But it does not look like, you look at the quality of that. All the details of everything. This is Bibbins, and then here's this. Because I grilled Colin Weaver. I'm like, how do we know this is not just J.S. Bibbins' studio? And it's like, oh, if this was his own work, this image right here, like he's like the worst photographer ever. But we pulled up and looked at Bibbins' work, and we looked at what we believe is very likely Lucian Foster's, right? There's another skylight. Here's a camera, so you can see a light coming from there. But sorry, yeah, you can see a little bit of side lighting there, which we learned when I did photography. You do not use side lighting for anyone like over the age of 20. Anyone that's starting to get any wrinkles, you don't do that because it will bring out every wrinkle. But that ended up being a good thing with my picture because then you can see so much on the right side of his face. You can still see the left side of his face, but it's bringing out these wrinkles. So if we can find the daguerreotype of that image, that would just be incredible. But if it oxidized, you're not going to see much because Emma's one carte de visite from the 1860s. And someone brought up, oh, well, I heard that they can make multiple copies. So where are the multiple copies of your picture? And just really, wanting to argue and stuff. But I think the answer is just it could. It doesn't mean that they always did. So there's only one 1860s copy, and a very rich man owns that, right? And then there's one from like the 1880s, but that wasn't at the same time. So if there were multiple copies of it, I think we would know about it. So I think Julia Murdoch Smith just had one. there is just one of this, and the gold tone and everything right there. It's almost, except it has a little bit thicker, and this is thinner, whereas this is, but it's still, this is 1860s. This is 1860s. I wonder what the back of hers looks like. But in the 1860s, Julia Murdoch Smith took the daguerreotype of her mother and baby David Hiram Smith and got it copied in Missouri. I think she was, because she lived in Missouri in the 1860s. I think she had it done from everything I've researched. So in the 1860s, Emma is writing letters to Joseph Smith III saying, I'm trying to get my negative taken. Oh, I'm still trying to get that done. So I think Joseph Smith III might have said in a letter, hey mom, can you copy dad's daguerreotype and then I can just show it to people, or whatever. But it could have already started to oxidize. I just don't know. But this still turned out good enough. It didn't, but there's only one of this, right? So someone was trying to say, oh, well, there must have been multiples of this. I'm sure they could. They could make multiples because you have a negative. That's the thing. And so you have a negative, then you can keep making more copies. So maybe she already had a negative. Maybe Joseph had a paper photograph taken in 1844. I was saying that from the very beginning. And that is still extremely like Lucian Foster could have done both. So when I talked to an expert in the Pioneer Memorial Museum, I'm like, well, couldn't they have done both daguerreotypes and paper photography? Because they both existed in the 1840s around the same time. It just, daguerreotypes got patented in 1839, paper photography like 1841. And then Henry Fox Talbot published the book, The Pencil of Nature, in 1844, when we think Joseph Smith got his daguerreotype taken. And most of the saints that were really filling up, making Nauvoo explode in numbers, were coming from England. They were immigrants from England. So that's where Henry Fox Talbot was from. So paper photography was popular there. And it just took longer for it to become popular in the United States. It existed, but once they realized how economical paper photography was, it stuck and has stuck. But now it's a digital, and we rarely, today, that's the sad thing, we rarely print off our own digital photography. And I try to remember to do that, especially since I have family and nieces and nephews that were so little and getting so much bigger. Just start printing off more throughout the years, because I just don't want to have a computer crash and just lose it. We always thought these papers were fragile, but digital is even more fragile in a way. So I don't know. Yeah, this is now modern photography of these type of studios sort of recreating those skylights. So the skylights, and then they have, like, today we have reflectors. So my friend and her husband, I remember getting my headshots done outside and seeing, he was really, really wanted to get good, and he was getting really good. So they have like four. So this type of camera would print off like four at once. But Emma's picture, there's just one of this. And then I see two copies of this much, much later on. There's one of her that's zoomed in, that's touched up with India ink, that it hardly looks like this picture, and it's really smoothing out her skin, and it's just sort of the same process like with the Carter image and the Library of Congress image, but her face dimensionally perfectly matches this, right? And then there was like a cabinet card, I think from the 1880s, that I found, that has extremely high contrast, but I think they recopied the same daguerreotype because it's such high contrast and such low, like there's a lot more detail in this than in this. But her 1880s copy uh, is more, I want to look that one up. Yeah, it's this one, and that is this one. So when I looked this up, I think this is an 1880s copy, and it's just super pixelated because even the digital, but it's very high contrast, very edited, and it's later. It's not, wasn't printed off as a second copy that day, whereas there's a lot more detail in this photo. And I have it zoomed in right here so you can see it actually was really good detail, but there's obviously more detail in this than in